What is going on, guys, and welcome back to the Pick Swap Media YouTube channel. My name is Barnard. As always, we are past the 25% mark through one quarter of the NBA season. The in-season tournament is in the books, and I wanted to take a second to unplug, take a little zoom out on everything, and kind of evaluate who the best players have been or currently are in the NBA. So in this video, I'm going to break down my top 30 players in the NBA, talk a little bit about each guy, why I have them ranked where they are, and I do want to frame it and make it clear that I am taking the stance of basically if I'm just lining up these guys from best to worst, that forget the stats, forget the context, who I believe on how they've played and what the numbers look for who the best players are from 1 through 30. So without further ado, let's hit that intro and let's get right into it.
To a wide open Tobias Harris. And Tobias drills it! Sixers up one!
Embiid fakes, Embiid down the lane!
All right, so to dive into it, I'm going to begin at 30 and work my way up to number 1 to crown the best player in the NBA. And I want to make it clear that none of this should be an insult. That for the players left off this list or for anyone on this list, you can nitpick, we can bicker in the comments. I would love to have some discussion on each of these guys, but I don't mean any of this is an insult. And if I'm calling a guy the 27th best player in the NBA, that's still a huge compliment. You're the 27th best basketball player on the planet. So none of this is intended as disrespect, but I am excited to get into it. I will make a quick note that Zion Williamson is a guy that I have off my list, and it's very disappointing at this point in his career. That is a little bit of a wake-up call. I know he's catching plenty of heat nationally, but when I watch this Pelicans team, Brandon Ingram and CJ McCollum, two guys who also are not on this list, are better basketball players than Zion Williamson, and that just straight up should never be the case. So that was one I wanted to put a little asterisk next to before I dive into it, that I was close and wanted to. But Zion, I should not be making a top 30 players list in the NBA without him being on it. And unfortunately, right now, I think that is absolutely the case. So now let's move into it and kick it off with the 30th best player in the NBA. And I believe that is Domantas Sabonis of the Sacramento Kings. On the season, averaging 18.8 points per game, 12.2 rebounds, 7.0 assists, shooting 57.5% from the field, 40% from beyond the three-point arc on just 1.3 attempts per game. We know he's not a guy that is known for this perimeter shooting, but what I am most impressed with his game is just being the overall just hub of the offense. That when you compare him to a guy like De'Aaron Fox, who I will get to later on this list as well, De'Aaron Fox averaging 6.5 assists per game compared to the 7.0 of Sabonis. There's so much off-ball movement for guys flying off screens, whether it be Malik Monk, Keegan Murray, guys like that he creates shots for. The movement is all possible because of his passing ability. And this is kind of a trend in the NBA. When we're talking about the archetype of guys like the Nikola Jokic, the Alperen Şengün, even Joel Embiid getting in the mix as a playmaker this year, Sabonis is very much in that same tier and category of player. Şengün's a guy that did not quite make the top 30 just yet. Would love for him to crack that at some point, but I don't think he's quite at that level. Sabonis, I do give an edge to because he does have that package of scoring, playmaking, and then 12.2 rebounds per game. A real deal high-level rebounder, a guy that commits to the boards, who boxes out, who makes sure that he has rebounds in his possession, and really is a vital part and engine of this Kings team. That I know there's a ton of talk about the Tyrese Halliburton trade and everything and how that happened. And for sure, you can make the argument that Halliburton, and as will be made clear by my rankings, is the best player in that overall deal. I still think Sabonis is a key part of what the Kings are doing and a guy that will continue to contribute as a key part of their team moving forward. So Sabonis at 30, and I will shift to number 29, where I have Bam Adebayo. Bam Adebayo is a guy that, for starters, his defense is what stands out the most. One of the rare players across the NBA that truly can guard positions 1 through 5, who is equally as dominant and as productive when he is guarding guards on the perimeter or stopping big men deeper in the zone in the paint. On the season, he's averaged 22.3 points per game, 9.9 rebounds, 3.9 assists, 1.2 steals, 1.0 block, shooting 52.2% from the field. Only 3 3-point attempts on the year. I would like for him to kind of stretch his offensive ability out a little bit. In his career, he's attempted just 65 3-point attempts. That is something I think could take his game to another level, but he still does so much good that should be recognized. An area that specifically stands out to me with Bam is his ability to, off the pick and roll, still be a secondary playmaker, that he's not a guy where the game is so simple where it's, for most big men, we think, this speaking on the beyond the top tier of big men, that when you think of just a classic NBA big man, essentially the job is you set a screen, you roll, you get the ball, and you shoot it, or you roll and you don't get the ball. Some guys are able to pop, and then on the defensive end, you essentially are a rim protector. That's your job. That is a very simplified game. That is not Bam Adebayo. That he's able to do some more advanced things when it's such as you get that ball off the roll and he's able to make a secondary playmaking option, whether that's a kick to the corner, find a guy cutting, things like that. Bam is trusted as a guy that's a decision maker in the Heat offense, and he truly is a guy that just fits the Heat culture prototype, that he's a grinder, he's hardworking, he competes on both sides of the floor. While I don't think Bam is quite at that top tier of star where he's sometimes forced in that conversation, I think there's a notable gap between him and the guys like the Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic of the world, obviously. But he's still a very good center and a guy that I believe is the 29th best player in the NBA. To move over to number 28, we're staying right here in Philadelphia with Tyrese Maxey. On the season, 27.1 points per game, 6.7 assists, which is a huge leap for his playmaking, 4.3 rebounds, shooting 46.5% from the field and 39.9% from three. I don't think the national medium has still caught up to how good Tyrese Maxey truly is. That this is a guy that is one of, if not the fastest players in the league. You pair that with a guy that has been top 5 in three-point percentage in the past 2 seasons and looks like he is on track to be right in that mix once again with further increased volume this season. Add in the fact that he has taken on these playmaking responsibilities, that he's answered the call, proven capable of running an offense, being a true point guard. And on top of that, he's improved on the defensive side of the ball. That we see his commitment to that side of the ball improving in that areas. And as much as defense, there's going to be matchups where he's overpowered from a size standpoint or from a just framework, strength, all these things. He does compete. He tries. His hands have got better as far as getting in passing lanes, nicking out little steals in a way that is very effective. Maxey does compete on this side of the floor. He's at least a passable defender at this point in his career. And that's all that we're asking Tyrese Maxey to be. So he deserves credit across the board. I think he's going to continue to climb up this list. I think 27 or 28 is quite the compliment already. And I think when things are all said and done, that Tyrese Maxey is going to be even higher and even better amongst the NBA's most elite. So shout out to Tyrese Maxey for continuing to put the work in, continuing to improve. And I do believe he's ready to be the number 2 star on a championship contending team like the Philadelphia 76ers. To move on to number 27, another Kentucky guard with blazing speed here. De'Aaron Fox is the 27th best player in the NBA. On the season, averaging 30.5 points per game, 6.5 assists, 4.7 rebounds, 1.5 steals, shooting 47.8% from the field, 36.9% from beyond the three-point arc. A guy that's done a really nice job adding things to his game and really well-rounding it in a way that we know the pace that he plays with. His electric first step, one of the few guys I would probably consider the 3 quickest players in the NBA, Tyrese Maxey, De'Aaron Fox, and Ja Morant, as far as getting downhill, nobody being able to match them. And what both Maxey and De'Aaron Fox have done at a very high level is be able to build things to their game where they both became decent three-point shooters. Tyrese Maxey, a better three-point shooter than De'Aaron Fox, but 36.9% is more than acceptable, and that's about on par for his career averages. You add that, and then for Fox specifically, his mid-range game has gotten very good. I love the way he's able to get to the elbow, stop on a dime, and then get that pull-up shot. And when you have that threat of being able to drive past a player, you're going to be able to walk into those shots or create those shots on a regular basis. So very cool the way that Fox has continually added steps to his game. He is a guy that has become the closer for this Kings team, hit some really big shots for that team. I love watching him play. Very fun player, continues to get better. And I think 27th spot in the NBA is a deserving spot for him. Next up, I'm going with Donovan Mitchell at 26. On the season, he's averaging 27.6 points per game, 5.3 assists, 5.9 rebounds, 1.9 steals per game on the season, shooting 45.5% from the field, 35.7% from beyond the three-point arc. I had a little bit of a tough time figuring out where to place Donovan Mitchell on this list. I will say he is a guy that I think the stats don't necessarily equate to winning in the way that he should. He has some deficiencies as well. And the first thing that I'll start off with is I think in a lot of people's heads, Donovan Mitchell's in this kind of wing category or wing tier of player, when in reality, he's 6'2", maybe 6'3", and a little bit slender of stature, that he's more or less a point guard, 2 guard, not a 2 guard, 3 guard, in the way that I think a lot of people have it in their brain. He's not a great defender. he does benefit greatly from having Jared Allen and Evan Mobley behind him, and that obviously is great roster construction as a whole. But now in both Utah and in Cleveland, it feels like he needs certain players surrounding with him that individually, I don't think he has quite the gifts as some of these other names that I'm soon going to get to, and I don't think it equates to winning quite the way. I am curious that I don't think he will be in Cleveland forever. He is a guy that strikes me as wants to get to a larger market, be a true superstar. When you consider Utah and Cleveland are pretty much among the bottom tier as far as market size for a team, I do think he ultimately leaves, and I think we'll get a clearer idea of what he is as a player or how good he can truly be. But for the time being, I'm locking him in as 26th best player in the NBA here. For number 25, the youngest player I've mentioned so far on this list, going with Paolo Banchero here. That there is a ton of talent on this Orlando Magic team, a ton of young players that are ready to be excited about, plenty to be excited about when we're talking about guys like Jalen Suggs, Cole Anthony, Franz Wagner. The list goes on and on for how much depth that they have there. But I don't want anyone to get it twisted that Paolo Banchero is the guy. He is the franchise centerpiece there. He's a guy that will be in the conversation for top 10 NBA players in the somewhat near future. That a couple years down the line, I truly believe we will be having those type of conversations regarding Banchero. And he's already very good. That on the season this year, averaging 20.7 points per game, 6.7 rebounds, 4.5 assists, 1.0 steal, shooting 49.4% from the field and 40.6% on three-point attempts. That's a massive leap from his rookie year, which is very encouraging. And I do think the playmaking is legit. As much as Franz Wagner, and they have a lot of these big guys that can handle the ball, it gets a little bit repetitive with it. And I think that the Magic now have to hit the point of figuring out who their exact core is, who are the guys that you maybe need to flip for parts that fit a little bit better. But the bottom line is Paolo Banchero is that dude. He deserves to be the franchise centerpiece, and he will be amongst the NBA's most elite sooner rather than later. So locking in Paolo at 25th on this list. Feel really good about that and excited for what the rest of his career has in store. Next up, we're sliding down to Atlanta, where I have Trae Young as the 24th best player in the NBA. As much as Trae Young has his flaws as a player, I do think the pendulum has swung too far where he gets more hate than he deserved. On the season, Trae Young averaging 27.2 points per game, 10.6 assists, 2.8 rebounds, 1.5 steals, shooting 41.2% from the field, which is an awesome 35.2% from three. A little bit of a slower start that even with those numbers, I think those are going to improve throughout the course of the season. And what impresses me the most about Trae Young, I know he was kind of thrown into this I guess pathway of the next Steph Curry, or the guy that has these shots from distance, the ice tray from the logo, all these things. But what impresses me the most about Trae Young is his playmaking, that his ability to force defenses to make a decision and then capitalize on that is incredible. That I would argue he's the best in the league at that particular trait, specifically in the pick and roll and throwing lobs, having guys like Onyeka Okongwu and Clint Capella to benefit from that. Trae Young does an amazing job of forcing defenders or defenses as a whole to make a decision and capitalizing regardless on what they decide. So I think Trae Young gets a little taken for granted on how brilliant he is as a playmaker. And of course, a guy that can catch fire, drop 40 pretty casually, and hit from anywhere on the floor when he gets it going. So Trae Young, I'm locking in for 24th. And while he can get picked on defensively and has his holes, I do think he goes a little underappreciated in this entire conversation. Number 23, going with Jaylen Brown here. Another guy that I had a little bit of a difficult spot with how to place him or where I rank him on this list, or if he even qualified. That there was a part of me that thought there might be 30 players better than Jaylen Brown, but I ultimately did not land on that. That on the season, averaging 22.0 points per game, 4.9 rebounds, 2.2 assists, 1.1 steals per game, shooting 46.2% from the field, 34.1% from three. There was a lot of pressure on Jaylen Brown when he became the highest paid player in NBA history this offseason. That is a contract that I'm not confident he plays out overall in Boston, because it does feel like there's a little bit of a clashing heads. And at times with Jaylen Brown, the biggest critique that I have of him is sometimes it feels like he needs to get his in a little bit in a way that he wants to prove himself of, I am this dude. When in reality, probably the best thing for the Celtics and how I think for them things ultimately should end is he has a little bit more of a reduced role, because they do have guys like Derek White, like Drew Holiday, like Kristaps Porzingis, and of course Jason Tatum, who I will talk about more in depth a little later in this conversation, that they have guys that can get the job done. So Jaylen Brown, I do think in another location, we are feeling differently about him one way or another. he still has his flaws as well. We know the left hand, the dribbling, all these things. He does get tunnel vision at times when he attacks the rim in a way where he probably shouldn't, but he's still a pretty high level defender. I've seen some critiques of his defense lately that I just frankly don't agree with. That I still think while he has moments where he takes off and is not playing his best, when he's locked in, he's among the best defenders in the NBA. And specifically from the perimeter standpoint in a one-on-one setting, I like Jaylen Brown quite a bit. He's a guy that I feel comfortable having at this 23rd, and I am very curious and intrigued by what the rest of his career has in store. I don't think it ultimately concludes in Boston, that I think at some point he will leave that organization. I think we will feel quite differently about him one way or another. But for now, locking in Jaylen Brown as the 23rd best player in the NBA. At 22, we are sliding up to Minnesota and giving Karl Anthony Towns the nod here. 21.9 points per game, 9.0 rebounds, 3.1 assists, shooting 50.9% from the field and 42.9% from beyond the three-point arc. Karl Anthony Towns has his ups and downs. There are nights where you can watch him that he looks absolutely incredible, like a guy that deserves to be in the top 10 conversation. And then there's nights where you just question what he's doing out there or how this fits, how this works. The thing that I will give Cat credit for is he became a guy that is not just a big man that can shoot. He's an elite shooter that happens to be big. And they are finding a way to make it work next to Rudy Gobert this year. That this Timberwolves team is the real deal. I am buying in on them. They do have pieces around him, guys like Jaden McDaniels, guys like Rudy Gobert, Anthony Edwards, of course, a guy that I will touch more in depth as we get deeper in this conversation. But Karl Anthony Towns has very much been the stabilizing force, the guy that has been there the longest. He can get red hot and take over a game, which is a huge characteristic. He does have his downsides on the defensive end. He's a decent rebounder, a guy that does get in the mix, does compete. So I do give Cat the nod here at 22. Not a guy that's one of my favorite players on this list by any means, but a guy that I will give his flowers to and give him respect and lock him in here. Tough one here at 21 to exactly rank. There's a little bit of an asterisk next to him. I considered leaving him off altogether, but I did put Ja Morant as the 21st best player in the NBA. Obviously, that's going to change when he does return. He is yet to suit up on the floor this year. Through his career, he has averaged 22.4 points per game, 7.4 assists, 4.8 rebounds, shot 47.2% from the field, 32.1% from beyond the three-point arc. I'm not a Ja Morant guy. That beyond the off-court issues and the conversations that can be had there, I do think there's some legitimate flaws in his play style, that he's overly reliant on his athleticism. The most electric and fun player to watch across the entire NBA when he has it going and when he makes these explosive plays. But I do question the longevity of it. That I've lived through the Derrick Rose era. I was a huge Derrick Rose fan. Derrick Rose at least had kind of a balance to his game. He was obviously very reliant on his athleticism in general, but I felt more confident about kind of the pull-up ability of Derrick Rose or his willingness to take three-pointers. And while Ja Morant statistically is not terrible, and honestly in my head, like I remember him hitting more big shots, I honestly think he's a better shooter than he is in actuality. Ja is not scared of the moment. He will be a superstar. He will take center stage. He will pull up and shoot a three when teams are disrespecting him, which is very important to this. But I still think that sometimes he just attacks the rim like a missile. He doesn't have a full plan when he gets in the air and just takes these reckless falls that one day will catch up with him. So Ja Morant, I have at 21. He needs to grow as a shooter. I'm hoping that he was working on that throughout this point in time. I'm curious what the future of this Grizzlies team has in store. They had a rough start to the season. I'm also curious what the Marcus Smart role will be next to Ja Morant. I still like this Grizzlies team. I think they're going to ultimately be much better once Ja comes back, obviously. But I'm curious to see kind of what the outlook for him and the team is from here. Number 20, a guy that I think many people will have higher up on this list. I have Damian Lillard at number 20 here. On the season, averaging 25.6 points per game, 7.0 assists, 4.6 rebounds, 1.1 steal, shooting 43.1% from the field, 35.7% from three. I do think we are seeing the downfall of Damian Lillard a little bit, that he's not the guy that he once was. He is very talented, still a guy that can compete at a high level, a guy that I do think will figure it out with the Milwaukee Bucks, but it has not been this clean process of, flawless, him fitting in right away, and this is a championship contender. There's going to be some growing pains with this Milwaukee Bucks team, and we're seeing it front and center. Now, for Dame specifically, one of the reasons that I dropped him down this list is I think it goes underrated how bad of a defender that he is. That Dame is pretty much a zero on the defensive end, and there are games where he's going to be targeted, we've seen some just disastrous defensive numbers with this Bucks team. They were worst in defensive rating for a good part of the first part of the season. Their pick and roll numbers have been pretty disastrous. And when you have a team with Brook Lopez and Giannis Antetokounmpo on the floor, it just should never be that bad of a defense. Damian Lillard is not solely to blame by this. Frankly, I think more of it has to do with scheme that Adrian Griffin has put in place, but Dame does not help that issue whatsoever. And I don't think he is either capable or has the desire with all this talent around him to be the guy that is just putting the team on his back. That there was a point in time where there is no doubt that Dame deserved to be right near the top of this list. I think those days are behind us. That while he's still a very good player and a guy that we will see what he truly has left when we get to the postseason, hopefully for his sake at a deeper level in the playoffs than he has ever been before. But at this point in time, I don't feel comfortable putting him above 20, especially as I dive into each of the names that I have above him. At number 19, a guy that has proven to do it at a higher level and on the biggest stage, I do have Jamal Murray here. A little bit of a down year to start the season for Jamal Murray. 17.4 points per game, 6.7 assists, 2.9 rebounds, shooting just 42.5% from the field, which is especially crazy considering he's shooting 41.8% from three. Jamal Murray goes underrated in my mind in the conversation that while Nikola Jokic is obviously tremendous, and we will get to him for sure, Jamal Murray is the other side of the coin there, that he is the guy that makes things possible with his ability to hit shots, with his ability to move off ball. He's still a guy that captains and runs the show from a standpoint, as evidenced by those 6.7 assists per game. Jamal Murray's the real deal. He does it at the biggest stage. He can put the team on his back when it needs to. He's comfortable taking a back seat if that is what's best. And he's effective in playing within that Nugget system, which is not the easiest thing to do. That not everybody could be built for this. We've seen this in Golden State too, where Chris Paul having some issues fitting into the Golden State system. There's no doubt that Chris Paul is still a very effective basketball player, even at this stage in his career, but that system is not for everyone. I think there's a little bit of that Jamal Murray deserves credit for, that he did find a way to be very effective playing off Nikola Jokic. It seems easy that, when you cut, you can have the ball put in your lap. Jokic, one of the most superior passers really ever at this point. But I do think Jamal Murray goes underappreciated in this conversation. And I think sticking him at the 19th best player in the NBA is right for what he deserves. For number 18, Jalen Brunson of the New York Knicks, I have here. 24.8 points per game this season, 5.5 assists, 3.6 rebounds, 1.0 steal, shooting 46.6% from the field, 44.1% from three. A straight up winner, a straight up master of getting to his spots, using his body. He's the smallest guy on the floor every night, and he's the toughest guy out there. That I'm incredibly impressed by Jalen Brunson every time I watch him. Was a big fan of him back in his Villanova days and had no idea or had no belief that he would reach this level of NBA stardom. That the Knicks got a ton of criticism for the contract that they handed him out this offseason, and he frankly is going to be underpaid this year. That he very much is a guy that can be a primary source of offense and also is comfortable taking a back seat and being the guy that, the Knicks, if they ultimately land that big fish and bring in a star, you can still keep Jalen Brunson right there. He's still going to be a high-level contributor and not be upset by having to take a back seat. We kind of saw it in Dallas with Luka. He was a perfect combination with Luka. And while you can argue that Kyrie is for sure the better, I guess, straight-up player, although I do not have Kyrie on this list at this point in time, kind of splitting hairs there, but a lot of inconsistency with his availability, play, all these things. Kyrie, from a talent standpoint, absolutely deserves to be on this list and has played well this year, but I did leave him off this top 30 list. But for Jalen Brunson specifically, he's a guy that was a perfect balance to Luka, where he had his moments where he could take over. When Luka was on the bench, that he was a guy that ran the offense, was the engine, produced at a high level. And the last thing that I will say about Brunson specifically is he raises his game in the biggest moments. That if it is the NBA Finals, if it is Madison Square Garden, if the bright lights are shining, that's when Jalen Brunson is at his best. That cannot be said about all these players, and I do think he deserves a massive amount of credit for it. Next up at 17, another guy that I believe many people will have higher, and that is Anthony Davis. That on the season, Anthony Davis averaging 22.7 points per game, 12.7 rebounds per game, 3.2 assists, 2.7 blocks, coming off an incredibly impressive in-season tournament championship performance where he dropped 40 points, 20 rebounds, 4 blocks in that one. On the season, he's shooting 53.3% from the field, just 23.1% from three. Anthony Davis is a frustrating one to me. I've never been an Anthony Davis guy. He's always fallen in that overrated category for me. I will say I think Davis is finding his identity as a defensive first guy, that he truly is probably the best rim protector in the NBA when he's fully locked in. The other guys I would put in that conversation being Jaren Jackson, Rudy Gobert, Joel Embiid deserves to be in the mix as well. But Anthony Davis was the best defender throughout the in-season tournament. He was the best defender during the length of time that he was in the playoffs last year before they were knocked out by the Nuggets. We see the level that he can play at. It's just frustrating to me that we do not get it regularly enough. That too often we see this kind of half-ass effort from Anthony Davis, him going through the motions on the floor. And that's so frustrating to me for the level of talent he could be. He falls a little bit in that category of an underachiever in my mind. And while still a very good basketball player, I think the grand plan in the LeBron James playbook when he went to Los Angeles was it was meant for LeBron to kind of pass the torch for Anthony Davis, for this to become Anthony Davis' team and LeBron to not have to do too much. That has not come to fruition, and I think that has much more to do with Anthony Davis being unable to accept the baton and take on those responsibilities. That to me is an indictment on him. While the Lakers are still competitive and still going to be a tough team this year, it is to me like that's Anthony Davis's job to be able to step up and do that. He has not been able to this point. So I drop him at number 17 on this list. Number 16, right across town in Los Angeles, going with Paul George here. On the season, Paul George averaging 23.4 points per game, 5.8 rebounds, 4.0 assists, 1.8 steals per game, shooting 44.7% from the field, 39.1% from three. I think we're seeing a lot of Paul George growing up lately. That there was a really cool mature moment on his podcast that he talked about. Very good podcast, by the way. I was surprised to see just how good of a host Paul George really is on this setting. But one of the things that he said that really grabbed my eye and grabbed my attention is him hitting that realization that he can't be the best player on a championship team. And that's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of players. And very cool that Paul's kind of that open about things. But he is right about that. And he ultimately is filling his, I guess, sidekick role at a very high level. That this Clippers team still has a lot to figure out. There's a ton of talent on this roster, a ton of egos on that roster. I will get to Kawhi pretty shortly here. But guys like James Harden did not crack this list. Russell Westbrook did not crack this list. Two guys that deserve to be on it at different points in times. But for Paul George specifically, he is the perfect mix of what you're looking for in the modern day wing. That he's a good defender when he's locked in. There was a point in time where he was a lockdown top tier perimeter defender. Those days are in the rear view for sure, but he can still get a bucket whenever he needs. Still a high level shooter as a catch and shooter, guy that can create his own shot when he needs. Can do a little bit of everything on the floor. And really the archetype of like a modern day wing for me is Paul George. So locking in Paul George at number 16, move to another wing that fits right in the modern NBA to some extent, and that being Jimmy Butler down in Miami. On the season, averaging 21.9 points per game, 5.2 rebounds, 4.1 assists, 1.2 steals per game, shooting 45.9% from the field, 39.1% from three, the exact same percentage as Paul George. Jimmy only attempting 2.6 three-point attempts per game. We know in his shot diet that he's very mid-range heavy, that he likes to get to the rim. He's a guy that just puts his fingerprints on every game that he participates in. And I really like that. I think that's a really positive characteristic of Jimmy Butler. He's a guy that I still, even when the Heat struggle, they could go 0-82 and somehow find their way into the playoffs. And I would still think that they have a chance. And a lot of that is because of Jimmy Butler, that on a night-to-night basis, he's not a guy that can raise the floor of an organization when you look at some of these stars like the Joel Embiid or Nikola Jokic or players like that. But on a one-game basis, he's better than anyone. That if we're lining up just a straight-up one-on-one game, there's a real chance, I think, about taking Jimmy Butler number one overall. That he's a guy that will to win, that competitiveness, and the ability to get whatever he wants on the basketball court is very rare. So Jimmy Butler does deserve his flowers for there. This is a different conversation come postseason. I know he kind of ran out of gas a little bit in that run last year, but that performance against the Milwaukee Bucks to send them packing in round one was up there in some of the most impressive individual performances in basketball I've ever seen. He was the toughest player on the planet for that stretch in time, for that series specifically. So Jimmy deserves his flowers. I put him as the 15th best player in the NBA, and you could make the argument he deserves to be a little bit higher for sure. For number 14, we're going to Paul George's partner in crime here, Kawhi Leonard, as the 14th best player in the NBA. On the season, 22.5 points per game, 5.9 rebounds, 3.6 assists, 1.5 steals, shooting 48.8% from the field, 41.7% from beyond the three-point arc. Kawhi Leonard, his best days are absolutely behind him as well. He's another guy that when seeing him play at his peak, and I would consider his peak that Raptors championship run, that was some of the most impressive individual basketball I've ever seen. I don't know if he has that level in the tank really ever again, but still a high level functioning and a guy that can contribute in a winning way. Defensively, he's definitely lost his stride, specifically in the lateral movement. I kind of notice it. It feels like he's much more slow footed than he used to be, but he's still a guy that is tough. He competes. We know the claw, the huge hands that he does get in passing lanes, stir things up, 1.5 steals per game, as I mentioned there. A very good shooter, a guy that can still take over. I like Kawhi. He's a guy that has such a high floor as a player that he's never going to hurt you or be damaging to have out there. He's pretty content in his role and a guy that you can slide up or down as far as he's asked to do on a night-to-night basis. So I will lock Kawhi Leonard in as the 14th best player in the NBA. Feel okay about it, and I would love to be proven wrong and think he deserves in the same conversation in this top 10 in the NBA. I think, unfortunately, it's a little bit past that. I think the Clippers as a whole are kind of hanging on each of these guys to have just enough to kind of combine for the team's success. Who knows if that will work out? I would love for Kawhi to have a little more in the tank. Big fan of his game as a whole and him as a whole, but ultimately I think 14th is the right spot to put him. Number 13 here, and a guy that I think probably some people have lower than I do. I have Mikal Bridges as the 13th best player in the NBA. On the season, averaging 23.2 points per game, 6.0 rebounds, 4.0 assists, 1.0 steal per game, shooting 49.3% from the field, 37.8% on three-point attempts. It's been a cool career trajectory for Mikal Bridges that we obviously know he was drafted by the Sixers, then immediately traded, had really a great career in Phoenix before being traded, that he was the perfect archetype of that 3-and-D wing, the guy that answered the call defensively, could hit high-level shots, was a perfect complementary piece. Then he gets traded to Brooklyn, and all of a sudden we can see what he truly can do with the basketball. When he can play with this basketball freedom, be able to create his own shot, add in the mid-range, change up the shot diet, and just do a little more overall. And boy, has he delivered. That it surprised me how bad Brooklyn has been. They've been competitive, but they have not been a good basketball team. I think there's a world where Mikal Bridges can be a number 2 on a championship team. Absolutely. He's continuing to improve, continuing to get better. The defense is the real deal. He's the perfect archetype of player when you talk about the size, the ability to get to the rim, the ability to shoot over guys, the way he competes defensively, and a very cool human being as well. That he's one of the more well-liked players across the NBA. It's cool to see the way that he kind of interacts on social media. A guy that is a Philadelphia local, went to Villanova, all these things. I love Mikal Bridges. It does suck from the Sixers standpoint, the trajectory of how things have not worked out, because he absolutely would be that perfect piece to blend Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid in. I don't think there's any world that the Nets move on to him. They absolutely should not, because he is a blossoming star. And I think he is a guy that could have the potential to grow on this list, climb into that top 10 as I revisit this, and who knows how long. To move on to number 12, another guy I very much expect to be within the top 10 in the short term, and that is Anthony Edwards. That at number 12, I have Anthony Edwards averaging 24.4 points per game, 5.6 rebounds, 4.8 assists, 1.2 steal, shooting 45.2% from the field, 37.8% from three. He competes on the defensive side of the floor, a guy that is in the conversation for most impressive two-way talents across the entire NBA. He can get to the rack. He can shoot it from deep. He can create from others. Anthony Edwards can do it all. He's got a little bit of that superstar aura to him. He's a guy that, as I mentioned, I do believe is going to be one of the future faces of the NBA, a guy that gets it done on both sides of the floor, competes, love his motor, love his personality. And I do think that he should be the building block of Minnesota, that I am happy that things are going right. They're figuring out this year, and that this is ultimately working as a whole. But if it came down to Karl-Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert, Jaden McDaniels, Anthony Edwards, it should be made clear that Anthony Edwards is the guy, that the decision should be made around his future, how talented he is. Maybe they're not forced to go on this crossroads, and that this team, as constructed, is able to succeed. But the keys to that organization should absolutely be in possession of Anthony Edwards. I do think that is the case. He's a joy to watch on a night-to-night basis, a guy that's only getting better and does feel like he is built for the spotlight as well. To move to number 11, another guy that I think several people will have higher up. Feel a little bad leaving him down at 11, but I do think this is the proper place for him, and that is Devin Booker. On the season, averaging 27.4 points per game, 8.1 assists, 6.3 rebounds, shooting 47.9% from the field, 42.6% from three. What has impressed me the most about Booker is his playmaking. I think that's an underrated part of his game that we know he's a little bit Kobe Bryant like in the way that he gets to his spots when he's attacking offensively, the way that he scores for himself. That Booker is obviously always been able to do that. His off-ball motion is very impressive as well. He's a guy that can either create with the ball in his hand or create without a shot. That specifically is such an appealing trait to me. Guys that are comfortable running off screens, comfortable creating the own shot without having the ball in their hand. That's so valuable to a team. Booker does a great job as that. And then the playmaking, as I mentioned, that he doesn't get enough credit for what a good decision maker he is with the ball in his hands. The Suns are playing so much of a non-traditional offense without a true point guard that Booker has been the guy to take on those responsibilities, and he's absolutely delivered on it. So keeping him down at 11th just because I'll get through the top 10 and talk about each of these guys. I do think Booker is a guy built for the moment as well, that when we get to the postseason, I love his competitiveness. I love when he's chirping and talking and when letting guys know when he is scoring on them. So I'm all for all that. Devin Booker does check that. And I do have him as the 11th best player in the NBA. To move to number 10, and this is kind of what started this list here, is we saw this guy's rise to stardom during the in-season tournament, and I wanted to see, is he truly a top 10 NBA player? And I believe the answer to that is yes, that I believe Tyrese Halliburton is the 10th best player in the NBA. I have him at number 10 on the list here. On the season, averaging 26.9 points per game, 12.1 assists, which leads the NBA in that category, 4.2 rebounds, 1.0 steal, shooting 52.5% from the field, 44.1% from three. He has shot over 40% from beyond the three-point arc every season he's been in the NBA. I know he's got that funky little shooting stroke where he doesn't really rise up. It's almost like a set shot, but I almost think that works to his advantage at times, that he can kind of sneak out that shot in a way that other players simply can't. And he does. He pulls up from deep. He has range well beyond the three-point line. And the playmaking to me is the most impressive part of his game, that I think he is the best playmaker in the NBA at this point in time. The 12.1 assists per game is incredibly impressive. And frankly, there are plenty of assists where potential assists that don't get scored that are even more impressive to me. He can do it in a variety of ways. That Trae Young, who I talked very highly about for his pick and roll decision making, Tyrese Halliburton can do it at a very similar level, but he's also better at driving to the basket, kicking out the three-point shooters. He's better at creating looks for others. And I think there's very much a difference when we talk about a point guard and a playmaker, or there's guys that are good at making decisions and there's guys that are good at creating opportunities for others. When you can do both of that, that's when you truly master the game of basketball as a point guard. That it's one thing to look at what the defense is giving you and make the right decision, put the ball in the right place. It's another thing to think about what you can create off that. If you can look off a guy and create a look for something else, or if you can dribble to one side of the floor in a way that creates an angle for you to create a pass for others, that's what Halliburton, I think, is more advanced at than other guys. That I see him come up with passes that other guys can't even dream of. And that's very impressive to me. So yeah, for me, he's got his concerns defensively. I'm curious how much this Pacers team, they kind of burst onto the scenes through this in-season tournament. And I thought the Lakers made a notable adjustment by going to the full court press and not allowing them to get into that up-tempo offense. So I'm curious how much that changed throughout the course of the season. But the bottom line is Tyrese Halliburton has been the engine of the offense that is first in offensive efficiency, first in pace. He's so fun to watch, so awesome with the ball. I do trust him to continue getting better. So I do have Halliburton as the 10th best player in the NBA at this point in time. Number 9, another guy that I just love watching play, and that is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander of the Oklahoma City Thunder. On the season, averaging 30.5 points per game, 5.6 rebounds, 6.2 assists, 2.8 steals, which leads the NBA in that category, shooting 54.4% from the field, 34.8% from three on 3.3 attempts per game from beyond the arc. He is a guy that can get it at all three levels. He's very good at getting his body to the right space, contorting himself, getting his spots. He's a little bit like Jalen Brunson in the way that they create their own shot. The difference being that Shai obviously has a couple inches bigger and is able to kind of be more efficient in that role. And defensively, he's the real deal, that he can guard an opponent's best player. The 2.8 steals per game is an absurd number there. He's got long arms that he's constantly getting into passing lanes, poking at the ball. Shai's a guy that will be in the mix for MVPs throughout his career if he's not already. That I think you can make the argument that he's there right now. For me, I have him a little down these names below. I'm going to dive into each one right after this, but I have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander as the number 9 player at the NBA, and that's pretty impressive based on where he is in his career trajectory. Number 8 right here, I have Kevin Durant. Felt a little bad dropping him down this low, but still a guy that I think has been passed by a couple of the young guns that I'm going to touch on here. On the season, Durant is averaging 31.0 points per game, 5.7 assists, 6.5 rebounds, 1.2 blocks per game, shooting 52.1% from the field, 50% from three. It should be noted that he's only played 19 games at this point, shooting 4.6 attempts per game. I do think that number will decrease. It's impossible to keep up a 50% rate over the course of the season, but he is truly one of the most elite shooters to ever touch a basketball. That Kevin Durant being able to play the way that he does at his size, at 7 feet, being a real deal 7-footer who's just a straight up shooter, a straight up sniper, a guy that can shoot it at all three levels, can create with the ball in his hand. His weak side defense gets overlooked a lot as well, that those 1.2 blocks per game are not by accident, that he puts himself in the position to make up for some defensive shortcomings. And that's especially important on this Suns team, which is more or less constructed hoping that he can do that. That with Yusuf Nurkic as the starting center, while he's played okay this year, I'm not a Nurkic guy. I think he straight up stinks, to be honest, but he's played okay this year. He's kept himself somewhat available. We know the DeAndre Ayton story did not work, but I do think Kevin Durant being able to provide that weak side, just help defense and blocking shots in that area is a real deal weapon on that Phoenix team. To move to number 7, another guy from the past generation, both Kevin Durant and this player right here that we take this list a couple years ago and that are surefire in the top 5. But number 7 in the NBA, I have LeBron James. On the season, averaging 25.0 points per game, 7.5 rebounds, 6.6 assists, 1.5 steals, shooting 55.3% from the field and 40.7% from beyond the three-point mark, which is a great number for him. There's no doubt that LeBron James can still do it at such a high level. He's a guy that has arguably probably the best basketball IQ of any player to ever play the game. And we see that he controls the game in a very different way than he used to, that he's not always this freakishly athletic guy sprinting down the court, slamming it down, high flying, blocking shots. He still has that in the tank, and we still see it for flashes. But that's not the LeBron James you're getting on a night-to-night basis. That there's many nights where he's more content being a playmaker, being a true point guard, running the offense, making the right play calls, doing all these things. And that's still a way that converts to winning, that he does have the pieces around him that allow him to do this. As I mentioned, I do think the game plan when he came to Los Angeles was to pass the torch to Anthony Davis and for Anthony Davis to be the true alpha of that. That has not played out in the way that I think everyone hoped. LeBron ultimately has had to shoulder a little extra load this year. I know there was the talk earlier on in the season about limiting his minutes. That has not proved to be the case, and it was also very clear that LeBron wanted to win that in-season tournament. He got the job done there and will have his name etched in the legacy of the first in-season tournament, something Michael Jordan never did, if we want to throw that out there. But no, on the real, I do think LeBron does deserve his flowers for still doing this at the level he is. It's incredible at his age that you take away the at his age stuff, that objectively, I think LeBron James has been the 7th best player in the NBA, regardless of how old he is. So this is not some grading on a curve, just straight up on how LeBron is. Being the 7th best player in the NBA at year 21 is absurd. To move on to number 6, I have Luka Doncic here. Very drastically different game from LeBron James, but I do think Doncic is slightly more efficient and slightly more productive in it. Look at his numbers as a whole: 31.9 points per game, 8.7 assists, 8.4 rebounds, 1.3 steals per game, shooting 48.8% from the field, 38.2% from beyond the three-point arc, a triple-double threat on a nightly basis, a guy who has found some nice continuity playing next to Kyrie Irving. Luka, it's very interesting to watch Luka Doncic. That I think his playmaking is probably goes underrated. I get that he's averaging 8.7 assists per game, so it shouldn't. But he has such an aura and such a dominance over the game that it feels like he's able to dictate the game in a way that many players just simply can't. He's got good size. He has his limitations defensively. I think he's gotten slightly better on that side of the floor. There was a point in time in last year's playoffs where he was really getting picked on from a individual standpoint, that they were fully playing the matchups. This was against the Phoenix Suns, fully playing the matchup to get him in coverage and just burying him. This might have been 2 years ago in the playoffs. My fault on that. But the bottom line is that Luka has improved a little bit on the defensive side of the floor. He is the engine of that Mavericks offense. And even with Kyrie Irving there, Luka's the guy. There should be no confusion about that. He's another guy that I expect to be winning an MVP at some point in time. I don't think it'll be this year. I think that it's going to come down to the three-man race of Nikola Jokic, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Joel Embiid once again. I'm going to touch on all three of those guys to spoil this in my top 3 there. But I do think Luka is in that next tier of superstars, a guy that, like, there's moments where it does not matter what you do. he's still going to get a bucket. He creates more separation on that step back than even I think James Harden did. I was watching one of these breakdowns, calculating where he gets about 9 feet of separation on his step back. That's insane to think about and really just straight up impossible to guard. So shout out to Luka Doncic getting it done without the top tier athleticism. His craftiness is the real deal. He does draw fouls. I know he's annoying to play against, but got to give him respect there. Now we enter the top 5 here, and the number 5 guy that I will give my respect to is Jason Tatum. It does pain me to put him in the top 5, but I have seen him do it at the biggest stage, front and center. That the Celtics wing this season, averaging 27.5 points per game, 8.7 rebounds, 4.2 assists, 1.1 steals per game, shooting 49.6% from the field, 35.6% on three-point attempts, gets it done on the defensive end. He's a guy that is capable of guarding an opponent's team best player. Not only is capable, it seems to take pride in it in a way that I do very much respect. He has mastered his game from a shot creation standpoint. His little side steps are very difficult to guard. He can create for others. He gets some grown man rebounds too, that you watch some games where he'll get 12, 15 rebounds, and it's very impressive. As I mentioned, competes defensively, can do it on at all 3 levels, scoring, has the athleticism, real deal 6'8" frame, continues to add muscle, continues to get better. I do give Jason Tatum a ton of respect for the work ethic, continuing to develop. And he is a guy that I unfortunately think should universally be regarded as a top 5 talent in the NBA. I see really no weaknesses in his game. That he has his bad games, there's no doubt about it. And he's annoying from the standpoint of complaining for calls, all this thing. But from a pure basketball standpoint, Jason Tatum is very much the real deal. He's the exact prototype for what you hope for from a player in today's NBA. He gets the job done. He deserves to be the 5th best player in the NBA. To get to number 4, and I already tipped my hat on my top 3, but my number 4 player here, I still have Steph Curry. And I know that I buried KD and LeBron for their age a little bit. Curry is a guy that I think his game is aging slightly better. That I know the Warriors have not had the team success that is expected or was hoped for heading into this year, but I do not think this is a Steph Curry issue whatsoever. On the season, averaging 29.4 points per game, 5.1 rebounds, 4.4 assists, shooting 47.6% from the field and 43.2% from 3. The best shooter that has ever lived. Still a guy that is getting it done. It's interesting to watch this storyline between the Steph Curry and Chris Paul dynamic. That there's been moments where they've been asked to share the floor. We're seeing a little more lately, specifically of Steph Curry and Chris Paul each having their units that they roll with. That Chris Paul essentially comes in when Steph's not there, brings Steph in, and now he's asked to be a little bit more of a playmaker. I love the way that he runs off ball, the way that he competes, his off ball movement, probably the greatest off ball mover we've ever seen as well. That truly is one of the more underrated skills. I know I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the way that Steph Curry is able to run around screens, lose defenders, and all you have to do is catch and shoot, there's nobody in NBA history that has been able to match that amount of intelligence and effort level to just get that done on a possession by possession basis. So I do give Steph Curry a ton of love. Give him my flowers. He is the real deal. Who knows how much longer this is going? I do not think the Warriors are going to fully get it together as a team this year, but I don't think that is any indictment on Steph Curry. That when you compare him to like a Klay Thompson, a Draymond Green, those guys feel like they have aged far more than Steph Curry has. He is still among the best players in the league and scares me on an every night basis that he could explode for 60 points tomorrow, and it would not shock me that much. Now we get into the top 3 in the NBA. Very clear that to me that this should be the conversation between Nikola Jokic, Joel Embiid, and Giannis Antetokounmpo. And I'm going to start at 3 here, and I believe the third guy on this list is Giannis. That on the season, averaging 30.5 points per game, 10.6 rebounds, 5.0 assists, 1.4 steals, 1.3 blocks, shooting 61.3% from the field, which is a career high from him, but just 24.3% from beyond the three-point arc. That's something that is pretty standard through his career. He's been a 28.6% three-point shooter. I think Giannis is a little overrated as a defender, which is probably the biggest reason why I took points off here, that he loves to do kind of the floating rim protecting, being a guy that is tasked with just coming across and cleaning up others' mistakes. I would like it if he takes it more personal to guard opposing teams' best players. I know Giannis has taken his digs through the media acting like this is schematic and this is a coaching issue, which to some extent I'm sure is true. But also, man, you just got to step up and do it sometimes and make the switch, call the switch that I want this player. I would like to see that more. And then the other thing that holds me back on Giannis and why I think that he's a little bit below the other 2 players, that being Jokic and Embiid here, is every basket looks so hard for him. Like, I get it. He's made out of his game is built on strength and physicality, and I do respect his mentality a ton, the way that he attacks the paint, the way that how relentless he is and how brutal he is to play against because of all these physical traits. But you never get this just like, here's an easy 2 points that Giannis gets. Every once in a while, you'll get a post up moment where he'll lay one in. But in general, he's working for his points. The game feels much harder for Giannis than it is for either Embiid or Jokic. And if we want to bring up the assists and the playmaking, Embiid has now passed him in that category. That just on this year specifically, Embiid averaging 6.4 assists per game, Giannis at 5.0. And I feel like Embiid is thinking the game in a way that Giannis just can't or has not throughout his career. So I do think that it is a very clear Jokic and Embiid for that top spot, Giannis at number 3. And to lay this out completely, you can't take Jokic out of the top spot. After winning the championship, he is the best player in the NBA. I do have Joel Embiid at number 2. And to lay out my case here, Joel Embiid is the second best player in the NBA, averaging 33.3 points per game, which leads the NBA, 11.5 rebounds per game, 6.4 assists, which is a career high for him, his previous career high being 4.2, shooting 51% from the field, 32.2% from 3, which is a little bit low for him. Also 1.9 block per game, 1.0 steal. The floor that Joel Embiid brings to a team is what brings him into this conversation. That year in and year out, these Sixers are going to be in the mix for one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference because of Joel Embiid. That you could have 4 brutal defenders around him, and he's still going to keep that team somewhat fine defensively. We're kind of seeing that for moments this year when we have some of these guys on the floor. And same thing with last year, that regardless of who's around him, Embiid does find a way to elevate the team from a team standpoint, and he truly can take over games. I mean, this is a guy that scored 50 points again this year. He's a guy that is showing the willingness to grow as a playmaker. Defensively, I think he is much better than Giannis and certainly than Jokic. I do think he's probably the best defender out of this top tier of players that we've talked about. Tatum would probably be the guy that I would consider the closest with it. Giannis is in the mix. I think Giannis and Tatum are somewhat similar, but I like Tatum's ability to take it personal in a way that I don't feel that Giannis does. And there's times where Giannis kind of misfires on plays that whether he's late on a rotation, late on a block, it happens more than I feel it should for a player of his quality. Embiid, the critique to him defensively, a lot of this is more schematic than it is his willingness, but he's never out there guarding on the perimeter. He's a guy that has become somewhat of a pure rim protector, which I hate because I know that he's capable of guarding on the perimeter. And frankly, I'm sure there will be moments where we get it. But one of my favorite parts about Joel Embiid's game is on top of the fact that he's, led the league in scoring the past 2 years and is on pace to do it for the 3rd year. When you look at the defensive side of the ball, he's willing to take on a challenge, that he gets up for those big time matchups, like against Jokic, like against Giannis, that you can see that. I love that about him. And he is capable of switching out and guarding on the perimeter. You can pull up plenty of tape from years past of him being able to slide his feet, move with a guard, and ultimately get the result that is desired. That's very much appreciated. I would love to see more of that mixed in. To fully defend him on this is very much the scheme that Nick Nurse is trying to build on the Sixers team is everything is funneled into Joel Embiid. Reminds me a little bit of what the Jazz did with Rudy Gobert back when he was playing for there, where they had these poor perimeter defenders that their job was to chase guys off the 3-point line, force them into Gobert, and then he cleans up the mess. Sixers really trying to do something similar with that, but there's been some ups and downs with the actual just capitalizing on that. So I give Embiid the nod as the second best player. I feel like I've only talked about his defense, and once again, he's a guy that is leading the NBA in scoring for the 3rd consecutive season. He can score against anyone. There's no player that has the one-on-one ability. He's a 7-foot Kobe Bryant that he can create off the jump shot and still has his moments where he dips his shoulder down, drops in the post, and gets the job done. So that combination of size, grace, and skill really is so rare to see, and give Embiid his flowers as the number 2 player. As number 1, that would be Nikola Jokic. I have fought this battle. I've been an anti-Jokic guy for plenty of time. I do have to tip my hat, give the respect. He has answered all questions that I could have. On the season, 28.4 points per game, 13.0 rebounds, which leads the NBA in that category, 9.6 assists per game, 1.1 steals, shooting 53.5% from the field, 30.4% from 3. He is one of the top playmakers. Forget the center, that he's one of the top playmakers, period, in the NBA. He's a guy that has obviously led his team to a championship. What I always questioned about Nikola Jokic was I did not think that he could lead his team to a championship because of the defense. That regardless of whatever analytics, what you guys can throw whatever you want to be with that, he's still a bad defender. But what I underrated was how good of an offensive talent he is. That he's not just a very good offensive player, he's one of the most elite that we've ever seen. And he's able to raise the team ceiling because of that. And the guy that deserves way more credit than he gets is Aaron Gordon for making up a ton of his shortcomings on the defensive end. But nonetheless, Jokic does compete, he does try, and he does get the job done for the most part there. So he's a somewhat passable defender. He's still below average. You're not going to get me to move off that one. That there's plenty of centers far better than him and not very few far worse than him. But from an offensive talent standpoint, he does deserve his flowers as one of the greatest players we've ever seen. The combination of scoring, playmaking, his ability to see the game is at a level that really no one else in the NBA can compete with. He's in that LeBron James kind of tier of vision with the floor, seeing the plays before they happen and being able to pass guys open. As I mentioned with Halliburton, I feel the same way about Nikola Jokic, that he's able to pass guys into space or pass guys into an opportunity that is not there without being created. That is where there's another level to this. Jokic is absolutely on it. And when he's still 7 foot, can drop in the post, do whatever, he is the real deal. So I do give Jokic his universal respect as the number one. I feel like that is an open and shut case to me that he should be at this point in time, especially coming after winning a championship. I don't think these are here to stay, and I will revisit these rankings for sure. But I do want to hear from you guys in the comments. What do you guys think? What did I get right? What did I get wrong? Who's too high? Who's too low? You let me know. I appreciate you guys for tuning into this video. Went through and dropped out the top 30 in the NBA. So appreciate you guys for tuning in once again, and we will talk next time right here on Pixel Media. Peace.